Greetings, friends. Yoyston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today, I'm joined once again by my good friend Royan. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing great. How you all doing?
Oh yeah, dude. I hope they're all doing well. Let us know in the comments. All right, well let's just jump right back in. This is the fifth Westernesse podcast, and I hope you have all had a great month. So we'll start with the timeline of the history of Middle-earth, and this month in Middle-earth, September, quite a few events have happened, right? So yeah, we'll start with 2968 of the Third Age. 22nd of September, Frodo Baggins is born.
Notable.
Very notable.
Also notable is 2890, also September. Also happens to be the 22nd. Bilbo Baggins is born.
Oh, yeah. Apparently, yes, in the Third Age, 2941. This is during the events of The Hobbit. Thorin and company arrive in Lake Town. So, again, it seems like a lot of notable kind of events for both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings take place in September. So, yeah, let's just run through them, Ryan, and because there are a lot of them, so we don't have to go too much into detail, but we'll just kind of fly through them here. 18th of September, the Black Riders cross the fords of the Isen. Gandalf is rescued by Gwaihir from the top of Orthanc in the early hours. And the Black Riders visit Saruman, who lies that Gandalf has confessed, and gives them directions to the Shire.
All right, so 2 covered carts then leave Bag End for Frodo's new house in Crick Hollow. They convey the furniture and goods that Frodo has not sold off already. And then on the 22nd, the Black Riders reach Sarn Fort and drive off the Rangers guarding it. It's also the birthday of Frodo Baggins, and they leave for Crick Hollow.
A few days before that as well, the 19th of September, Gandalf arrives at Edoras, and he's denied entrance, and that's when he takes Shadowfax. Just wanted to throw that one in there too.
Yeah. Where are we now? 23rd, right?
Yeah.
23rd. All right, so Gandalf leaves Rohan after taming Shadowfax, and the Black Riders arrive at Hobbiton at nightfall.
Perfect. 24th, Gandalf... Oh, by the way, yeah, we're using the timeline of the history of Middle-earth from the Lord of the Rings project, and I'll link that again down below. So big shout out to these guys who've created this. This is very helpful. 24th of September, Gandalf crosses the River Isen, and the hobbits encounter the Nazgul near Woody End, by kind of that south part of the Shire. And the chanting and the singing of the elves to Elberoth scares the Nazgul away. The hobbits meet Gildor and the high elves that have come from the western towers, and I believe are heading back east to Rivendell, and they camp with them during the night. Or at least, maybe it's the other way around. Maybe they're coming from Rivendell, heading towards the west.
Next night, they reach Farmer Maggot's estate, and they meet Mary near the ferry, and Crick Hollow for the night.
26th. The 4 hobbits encounter the evil tree Old Man Willow. They're rescued by Tom Bombadil, and that's when they spend the night at his house. The 4 hobbits enter the Old Forest, leaving Fredegar Balger to impersonate Frodo in his house in Crick Hollow in Buckland. And two Nazgul come to Bree from the South Road. So you have this more of Sauron's servants coming up from the south.
Yeah. So the next day, we're at the 27th. Gandalf crosses the River Greyflood, and that brings us to the 28th, where Frodo and the rest of the hobbits traverse the Barrow Downs and are captured by the Barrow Wight. Tom Bombadil rescues them, gives them weapons and 4 ponies, and suggests visiting the Prancing Pony at Bree. Also, Gandalf reaches Sarnford.
And this is kind of beginning Gandalf's path, retracing the steps of the hobbits, trying to find them as soon as possible. 29th of September, Frodo and his companions reach Bree at night. They stay in the Prancing Pony. Gandalf visits Sam's father, the Gaffer, and Strider hides. I actually really love this point in the book, because the first time I read it, I was wondering what was going on. But Strider hid behind the hedge on the road west of Bree. He eavesdrops on Frodo, and then in the inn, I think Aragorn actually sneaks over the gate of Bree, and Frodo kind of catches a glimpse of that before entering the Prancing Pony. Inside of the Prancing Pony, Frodo arouses attention by his sudden disappearance. I believe he was dancing to distract the people from Pippin, and then Strider warns him to be more careful in the future.
And that actually brings the end of that year, right?
One more. The 30th of September, Crick Hollow, which is Frodo's house in Buckland. It's actually raided by the three Black Riders in the early hours, and Fredegar Bolger, he alerts the village of Buckland, and the Black Riders run away. But yeah, that does it for 3018 of the Third Age.
Well, the next year is actually after the end of the War of the Ring, and it's Gandalf and the Four Hope, or no, sorry, I'm reading the wrong one. Celeborn and Galadriel depart, and the rest escort. So they're at Rivendell, and then this is where, oh my gosh, it's time late. I'm getting lost up here. All right.
No, you're good. You're good. I think this is kind of when all of the company is heading back north.
Yeah, so Celeborn and Galadriel depart from the company, which has Gandalf and the Hobbits and all that.
Yeah.
And then the rest of them start to head towards Rivendell. They then arrive at Rivendell on the 21st of September, and Saruman arrives at the Shire 22nd.
Sweet. And that does it for 3019, 3020, and 3021. This is kind of when we get to the end of Gandalf and Frodo's time in Middle-earth. So you have the 22nd of September. Bilbo Baggins becomes 131 years old, the longest living hobbit in all of history. And I think that was his goal, to outlive the old Took, right? Yeah, I think it was the old Took. And then Frodo and Sam meet the last writing, which is Gandalf and Elrond and Galadriel, the last riders who kept the Rings of Power, the three Elven Rings. And then the 29th, they all head to the Grey Havens and pass over the sea, never to be seen in Middle-earth again.
That's the end of the Third Age, but we have one more thing from the Fourth Age. Is the 22nd of September is actually when Samwise Gamgee entrusts the Red Book to Eleanor and then departs Middle-earth, last of the Ring Bearers.
Mm-hmm. That was the year 61 of the Fourth Age. Yeah, that was a lot of events happened in September. I always love this section on our podcast. We started it last month with August, and we'll keep going again next month with October. But it really just it shows Tolkien's ability to manipulate time in his tales. Like, I feel like a lot of writers, they don't really pay too much attention to that. A few days go by, a week goes by, and then we continue here. But you really learn, like, thousands of years go by in Tolkien's tales, and sometimes individual years, they'll just have a lot of events.
All right. So what's next on the agenda?
All right. We're going to... So before, we've talked about what we like in Tolkien's works and the Legendarium, some of the things that maybe we don't understand or hasn't like connected with us. Now that we've explored all of that, I want to jump into the deeper themes, or at least a few of them. I think this is just kind of the start of the discussion. And ultimately, I want to hear what you guys have to say in the comments to a lot of these deeper themes within Tolkien's works. But yeah, ultimately, we want to explore maybe some of the ideas behind Tolkien's writings. I may have already mentioned a few of these ideas in my Building a World series on my main channel. But I mean, ultimately, before we start, I do want to mention that I've gotten a lot of comments about this in my on my videos. So Tolkien, he definitely does not like allegory, you know? It appears that he wants fantasy to be escapism, and when something seems to be an allegory for human nature or society or contemporary classic events, it kind of takes that escapism away from that fantasy. So ultimately, I just did want to throw that out there before we jump into what these themes are, what they might mean, what that means for the narratives at large. But Ryan, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I have to say on that topic specifically is that although Tolkien states that he's not a fan of allegory and he would rather that you don't think about the people in his story as people with the same rationale as us here today, I still think that it's important to connect those things because that's how you can create a story that means something different to each person, which is what Lord of the Rings does so well.
Yeah.
So moving on to the actual themes, I think the first one we want to talk about is Eurocentrism.
Yeah.
Which is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. The idea that, Tolkien was a European. He was from Great Britain, England. And when you look at the actual map of Middle Earth specifically, it does really seem to mirror or maybe just take effects away from Europe as a whole.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. Whereas when he was going back and adding more to the Silmarillion, he could have definitely changed the outline of it. Maybe the west is where the enemies lie, and maybe the east is where all the free peoples live. But no, he kind of took a similar approach to Beleriand as he did to Middle Earth. It looks very similar in that European standpoint, and it also puts a new perspective on Middle Earth being further east in the past than it is in like the third, fourth ages and on, you know? Yeah, and ultimately, a lot of people, I just want to kind of touch on this topic and kind of give my thoughts. And if you guys want me to, I can go into this in a more thoroughly researched and dedicated video. But ultimately, a lot of people say, why are all of the main characters and good guys white, right? Why are they fair of complexion and all of these things? While maybe some of the servants of Sauron, for instance, are more Eastern or Southern in appearance and complexion. To that, I would say, again, it kind of goes back to this Eurocentric detail. From all the maps that we can gather of Arda that Tolkien kind of inspired or created himself, it seems that, Middle Earth is very northwestern in the grand scheme of things. And again, Europe, very similar. So geographically and culturally, you're going to have a lot of these people that are similar to Europeans, right? And a lot of Europeans, especially in earlier times, were predominantly white. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much as far as I want to go with that. But yeah, Eurocentrism. Is there anything else you want to kind of add to that, Ryan?
Not really. Aside from like the geography and the themes that you want to get in there, as you get farther deep into it, you get to a lot of different political discussions, and I really don't think that there's enough known to just really dive into that and take stances and stuff like that. So it's mostly from a geographical standpoint for me. Mm-hmm. Middle Earth, like if you just twist it in the right way, can look a lot like Europe does and did when he was writing these stories. But I think that's really about as far as I really want to go on it. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, we can move forward. It also seems like a lot of the stories in Middle Earth, they seem to be Christian based, or at least somewhat biblically tied. Do you want to kind of jump into that?
I think that the most obvious biblical reference that you could take would actually be Gandalf the White, who is, it's not exaggeration to say that he's the wandering pilgrim savior who comes back from the dead and saves the day.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he is all, like you said before we started, he's all dressed in white when he comes back. He's this very holy figure in that sense of the term.
And I think he really does. Gandalf as a character, and I think this portrayed expertly in Peter Jackson's films by Sir Ian McKellen, is a perfect image of purity in a way, or in this legendarium. He seems to be that he's definitely tested in a lot of different scenes, especially when it comes to the ring, but he never truly cracks. And I think that's really that's the main comparison.
Yeah. And it's kind of fascinating too. I mean, as I'm learning more about the Silmarillion with in regards to making more videos about the stories that took place during the First Age, Arendil or Earendil or however you really want to pronounce his name, Earendil. I've heard that pronounced as well. People get on my case about pronunciation. It's fine. He also kind of presents this Messiah-esque character, right? So he is the heir of the elves pretty much of the Noldor. Now he's not. Again, he's a half elven because his father was Tur of the House of Hodor, but he's kind of the heir. Besides Gil-galad, he's the heir of the Noldor. He's the heir of the House of Hodor from his father Tur, and then he marries Elwing, and Elwing is the heir of Beren and Luthien. So the elves of Doriath, like the Sindar elves, and the elves of, or at least the wood elves of Doriath, and Beren, who's the heir of the House of Beor, passed that on to Elwing. And then, of course, their kids are Elrond and Elros. So you could kind of see Elros and Elrond as well as these Messiah-esque characters that carry pretty much all of the elves and the men on their backs, except for, obviously, the middlemen who remained in Middle-earth. But it's quite fascinating how Tolkien kind of takes these characters and mystifies them to a lineage degree and in a way that makes them so important almost religiously.
So the next character that I want to talk about with a tie to a biblical idea is actually Aragorn. And whereas you could say he is the heir to the throne, he is the king, and instead of going for riches and glory and gilded and like gilded halls, he takes the ranger approach, which is to frankly just like a hermit, a weird guy who lives in the forest. But
oh yeah.
And there's actually a quote from Isaiah, the book of Isaiah. It says, quote, "He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him." End quote. And I think that really just, you can really solidify that Aragorn, he's not as charismatic in appearance as he is in action.
Yeah.
You follow him because of what he does, not because of what he says or what he looks like.
And even because of his lineage. I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. He doesn't really have to prove to too many people, hey, I'm the son of Arathorn, who's the son of Eredor. He doesn't go through all the line to...
he doesn't whip out the family tree.
Yeah, exactly. He doesn't, and he doesn't have to. He kind of, in healing Faramir and Merry and Éowyn, he proves himself a king. And, he goes out, fights on behalf of Gondor, of the West, and again he almost reestablishes himself. I mean, he does establish himself as a king, whether or not, I mean, obviously the lineage helps, but even I feel like if that lineage wasn't there might have been a part of him to just be able to prove, to make a second kingship, or at least to create a different kingdom. It's very fascinating.
And it's definitely apparent that whereas Denethor is a ruler, Aragorn is a healer. Mm-hmm. And he's there to heal for his people as opposed to rule them.
Yeah. And that's really interesting because monarchies are very apparent, I feel like, in old Christian stories and in medieval times. But as far as we can tell in current society, right, monarchies aren't really around anymore. There were flaws with them. Do you think, I want to kind of get your opinion on this, Ryan. Do you think the lineage of Gondor and Arnor through Eldarion and through Eldarion's son, Aragorn's grandson, do you think that would have worked well, or do you think eventually come the 4th or 5th ages, it would have been time to overthrow that monarch?
Okay, so before we get into the geopolitical structure of Middle Earth here,
yeah,
I think it's important to note that, so like we said, Tolkien definitely leaves the story open-ended.
Oh yeah,
there's no happily ever after. It's specifically written so that you can make of it what you will. Mm-hmm. And I would argue that with Middle Earth, you have a history without change.
Yeah, that's true.
And as you go back and back and back and farther down the timeline, there's a lot of the same going on. And this goes outside the obvious technological improvements that don't really happen necessarily. I mean, in the first stage, versus the end of the third age and into the fourth age, you have thousands of years that we're talking about, and everyone's still got a sword. So I do think that in Middle Earth specifically, you could argue that the Gondor or whatever race of men that they might change to in the future will always have the same values and the same monarchy. But in the same time, like, as time goes on, enthalpy or just randomness or change increases. So
True.
all it takes is one bad king, and that can be no one's fault but that person's. All it takes is for one guy's son to decide, you know what? I don't like this. I want more.
That's fair. Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, that unchanging point is spot on. I do also believe that the kingship probably would have lasted almost forever. Just because, again, it's this ideal fantasy world, or this at least ideal history, false history on our own world. And in this ideal history, yeah, you would want kings that have valor and honor. Aragorn and pretty much all of his ancestors, well, except some of the Numenorians towards the end, a lot of them demonstrated those qualities. So I do think, yeah, I mean, in those similar, almost unchanging circumstances, it would have continued on and lasted. So cool. Okay. Well, unless you have anything else you want to add to this theme, we can move on to the next one.
The only thing that I really want to talk about, and this is not a Bible reference specifically, this is more of a John Milton reference.
Oh, yeah.
As I wish I had more details just off the top of my head, but the 9 rings of hell, right? Descending an order from the top to the bottom, you get worse punishments, for worse people who committed worse sins. At the bottom, the 9th ring of hell, where Satan lives, is reserved for not the murderers, not the rapists, not the cruelest people of all time, but for the traitors, the people who took trust and then threw it back into the river. And this, you can say, is echoed in Middle Earth, where no matter how bad you are, no matter how good you are, you're always freed with death.
Mm-hmm.
Except
traitors.
For the traitors, and specifically as we get into the hall, into like in Aragorn's storyline, where he goes into the halls of the dead and meets with the traitors, and in the end forgives them for what they've done, provided they raid a few ships. But
help them take back a city.
And you could argue that that's a pretty big Christian theme.
Yeah, I can see that. No, that's an excellent point.
That's really all I got.
Again, like, as we go through these themes, please just let us know your thoughts about what we're talking about in the comments. And we're kind of just giving them broad overviews, and we're just kind of moving to a bunch of broad themes. So the next one is, again, it's very simple: good versus evil. It's very interesting. A lot of people, at least critics of the 20th century of Tolkien's works, these modern critics, they want characters that are just so three-dimensional. They want for all of you Game of Thrones fans out there, they want the Jaime Lannisters, they want the people that struggle so they can, I guess, relate to them more. Now, a lot of them gave Tolkien flack for maybe not having enough three-dimensional characters, but I wholeheartedly disagree with them. I think these characters, such as Boromir, Smeagol, Eowl, the Dark Elf from the Silmarillion, these are characters that are flawed and maybe trying to do right in their own minds, but are harming others in the process, right? Depending on their specific actions. I fundamentally disagree that these characters aren't three-dimensional. Even the ones that have more of a strong moral compass, such as Aragorn or Frodo or Sam Gamgee, right? These are characters that you can really follow. And I would say, yeah, they're both three-dimensional, and they're good. And they're good versus evil, right? Sauron, another character I would also call three-dimensional. He's a fallen Maya. He was a servant of Aule the Smith, and he fell to Melkor's seduction of power and order, especially order. Right? Again, it's not just, oh, I just want to rule the world. I want to fight that tyranny. It's a lot more complicated. It gets the inner psychology. Sauron he loved order, and he thought the best way he could bring order is through his tyranny. Right? But again, it also fits into this good versus evil. At least that's how I perceive it. What about you, Ryan?
Yeah, I think that this is the greatest hypocrisy of pop culture criticism ever.
Dang.
Is the fact that everybody wants a three-dimensional character with flaws that they can relate to.
Yeah.
Because people are done worshiping someone who can do no evil, can do no wrong. But at the same time, when characters make mistakes in movies, in books, in films, it's seen as a plot hole. True. And it's really easy for you to do when you're sitting from the outside, you're looking in with your third person omniscient view, and you're like, well, this is clearly the right course of action. Why didn't you take that? That's just bad writing. But in the reality, I think it's just trying to relate to, if you are in that person's perspective, and you have to understand you know more than they do.
Yeah,
especially in a Middle East, or in a Middle Earth, like medieval setting. They don't got the internet. They don't know all of these references. They don't know, like, oh, well, this is just like a Shakespeare play.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's a great point. And take Turgon, for example. And in my last few videos, I've talked heavily about him and how he was too arrogant to move his people from Gondolin because he thought he was safe. Yeah, from the outside looking in as a reader, you're like, oh, dude, you just doomed everyone. You know, you could have saved him. Yeah, what an idiot. But it's like, well, you think about it from his shoes.
Gondolin had stood for so long.
Yeah, and every time they had left the walls of Gondolin and the mountains, the encircling mountains, they had gotten killed. They had gotten kind of, screwed over by Melkor's forces. But every time they stayed within, right, it was hidden, it was safe. But moving their people to the havens of Sirion, that might have done them in, right? That might have been, oh, we're on the road, and then all of a sudden this big dragon comes out of nowhere and kills everyone. Kills all of the elves.
We're back to the Christian theme with the traitor.
Yeah, true. And again, it was only a traitor that took him down. I mean, to be fair, Hurin, who was at this point kind of an old man, he walked outside and he was yelling, Turgon, help me, I want to find
Let
Gondolin.
Me in.
Yeah, let me in. And Morgoth's like, okay, so Gondolin must be pretty close. But again, he probably wouldn't have even found Gondolin, at least not as easily and not nearly as precise as he did when he captured Meglin and told him, okay, you can have Gondolin and Idril if you tell us where it is. Yeah, traitors again.
So yeah, I mean, the good versus evil, I think, and this is when I look at today's pop culture, I would argue that Game of Thrones is like the closest as far as a fantasy world to Middle Earth, but of course it has a lot of different themes. And this is one of those where in Game of Thrones, there's not a character who is completely and 100% evil, and there's not a character who's completely and 100% good. There's some people who are close. I would argue that Jon Snow is the kid, but who can do no wrong and has just kind of been like shafted throughout the story.
True. But all of the morally righteous characters at some point in that story kind of find their knife in this heart,
Yeah. And I think that that's one way that you can approach a story, but I don't find an issue with having big bad guys versus big good guys.
It's almost a return to form, on how old literature used to be.
Right? Yeah, you could argue.
And I guess this kind of transitions well into our next theme, Norse mythology inspirations, maybe some old tales as well, such as Beowulf, right? From these
As an old tale.
yeah, it is. It really is. But even in his tale, it was like it was Beowulf, a protagonist, and I mean, you might be able to argue some character flaws. Granted, I don't know that story as well as I know Middle Earth stories, but ultimately, you know, you have this hero going up against a dragon, big villain versus big hero, right? And that's not necessarily an issue. That's something I think at the heart of it that we're all wanting to see done well, you know, such as in Infinity War for, you know, that movie that just came out. And that's why one of the reasons it did so well, you have big good versus big evil.
But the big evil is also not.
Yeah, and he's three-dimensional and relatable, yeah. I think that's what people want. They want a balance. They don't want just people randomly going around stabbing each other for no apparent reason because everyone's on this gray line of morality. But they also don't want, you know, this necessarily Bond villain each time versus this unbreakable, unbendable, more moralistic character.
But at the same time, you have Star Wars, and I would argue that Star Wars, especially the original movie, put yourself in 1977, where you have a character with no explanation at all, Darth Vader. This is before the prequels, baby.
That's true.
You got the big bad guy. He's in a black suit
with a red weapon.
That guy's evil.
Yeah, he is.
Why is he evil? Because he is.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. And maybe that's something like society, it's just a pendulum. You know, right?
And if you ask anyone, I would like there's a large population that think that those first three Star Wars movies, I think in the third one especially, they really go into how he's really not the big bad guy because Sidious is the big bad guy who's evil for the evil's sake. But especially in 4 and 5 or A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, you have Darth Vader being the evil guy because he's supposed to be the evil guy.
Yeah.
And that's I would argue that I don't think there's anyone out there who will say, you know what, that's trash. That's weak character building.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and maybe it has to be done in a certain way, or maybe it's different when it's a book versus a movie.
I just think there's two ways of doing it.
Yeah, that's fair. But even Darth Vader, like people loved him even more when they kind of, you know, at least when
they did not like him in episode 1.
They did not. No, they liked him to the end of episode 6, and then Rogue One, pretty much. But yeah, they liked him more when they just explored, he's the father of our protagonist. He's actually a slave to this master, and he can't defy his own dark side and, you know, his master's. He can't defy that, right? And that's very interesting. And going back to, like, just some of the other inspirations, I mean, I just got done reading a book on Norse mythology, and and ultimately, like, there are so many oh my gosh! After saying Silmarillion so many times, I can't say similarities anymore. That's a word that's out of my vocabulary. If you ever hear me say that word in a video, just know I probably edited it about 5 times. But yeah, it's similar to like the beginnings of the world in Norse mythology and the end of the world. Ragnarok is very similar to Daggeroth or at least the prophecy of it, you know. You have all these inspirations from that mythos especially. And it's very interesting because, again, a lot of it is kind of good versus evil. I mean, you have Loki, who's this mischievous in-between guy. For most of the book, he was an anti-hero until the end came, and then he was just the straight-up villain. But, yeah, I mean, even that is betrayal, right? Going back to that whole betrayal theme. And that made him the villain, not the one who was from the beginning, not Surtur, for instance. He's that big guy with the flaming sword that will, like, destroy the universe, the world. Yeah.
If you saw Thor Ragnarok, that's him.
Yeah, that's him. Like Surtur, it would have been easy to make him just the main villain. Oh, this guy's big and scary, and you know everyone who we're telling this mythology to should fear him. But no, they went the other route, the mischievous, the betraying Loki. Right? That's the one that draws a lot of attention. And again, Morgoth, he's a fallen god. Sauron, pretty much a fallen angel. I mean, that's definitely a big generalization, but at the heart of it, that's kind of what it is. So yeah, it's very interesting. You don't have these automatically evil, automatically good, but And yeah, we can move on to our last kind of theme here before we dive into this month full of news that we got. But ultimately, I talked about this a bit last year in my video, "Why Do We Love Tolkien's Works So Much?" I think it was titled something like that, or "Why Tolkien's Works Are So Meaningful." And it's ultimately comes down to two things, in my opinion. It's that Tolkien realized there was a loss of literature throughout the world, right? Through all the wars, and all of the different burnings of libraries and natural disasters, all of this, a lot of literature that has been written in history has been lost to time. And you'll never get that back. You'll never get those stories, those ideas, those mindsets of these people that wrote them. You'll never get those back. And that was one of the saddest things for Tolkien. And I think that's probably one of the saddest things for any author. So he kind of brought that feeling, this feeling of nostalgia, of loss, into his works, right? You have the fall of Beleriand, which is probably the biggest one for the elves, that and being banished from Valinor or being exiled, right? You have the loss of the Elder Land and the Elder Days. For men, it's the fall of Numenor, the fall of Arnor. Dwarves, it's the fall of Khazad-dûm, the fall of Erebor, right? Even kind of the hobbits, they get towards the end of the Lord of the Rings.
I would say that the scourging of the Shire is their loss, but at the beginning of the War of the Ring, they're seen as this innocent, like untarnished race. Mm-hmm. They haven't seen the loss yet.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of interesting, right? The Elder Kindred, elves, they saw that loss the most. And then the one that you could argue is right after them, dwarves or men, right? They saw that next. Even the dwarves in the first age, they lost Nogrod, Belagost, all of these places. And yeah, I feel like it takes a toll on you losing all of these pieces of your history. And that's something that the human race in real life has to deal with. We've lost, right, the Library of Alexandria.
I think that's just a historical example of something that is... It's not talked about like extensively, but it is definitely like it's something that's unreversible. Mm-hmm. It's there was so much knowledge in the Library of Alexandria when it like burned to the ground that has been lost, that we still don't know if there was something in there, something that like could change the world today.
Yeah, and I believe when England was bombed by Germany in World War II, that was a big part, or at least maybe a big fear, was losing those ancient artifacts, that literature, and all of that as well. It's truly it's fascinating because you don't really think about that much. You always think, especially in today's world where everything's almost uploaded to the cloud, to the internet, to some kind of drive somewhere else, right? You almost don't have to worry about losing data, right? But even 100 years ago at this time, I don't know, you lose a family record and that's it. You likely will never be able to know who.
I mean, just think about it. Like, this is why fire is such a, like, in the history of human, this is why fire has always been seen as like this evil force. And it's like, imagine it, like, let's go small scale. Say you have a business or a company. Say like someone went into your online records and deleted it all overnight. Or in our analogy, you have a house or like a company or a factory or something, and it burns to the ground. You've lost everything and that goes beyond like whatever you were working on. Like if you're a cloth factory, that goes beyond losing your machines and possibly your workers or like all your goods and stuff like that. That goes back to like, now you've lost the deed to that land.
Yeah, true. Yeah. And again, like even our worst nightmares of losing data, for instance, like if my channel was deleted at some point, right? All of those, right? That would be devastating. All of those videos, the experiences that I had, I could never replicate them in the same way, nor would I really have the time to do it in the same way that I have once done that. But
even if you re-upload videos, you still have different people seeing it. You have different people having different reactions to it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's Yeah, that's incredibly sad and scary. But even then, who knows? My videos could be saved elsewhere. I've kept a lot of them on drives that I have, right? All of these kinds of things. But they didn't even have that, right? Sometimes the only copy of a book that you had from the 15th century was one that somebody spent years like copying, you know?
If you didn't have a monk who decided to put depending on how long your book was, like months to years of his life into copying that book, you probably didn't have a copy of that book.
Yeah, exactly. and that was just that was incredibly sad for Tolkien. So I think he implemented that well into his world, right? Who knows what was lost in the downfall of Numenor? Who knows what was lost to the hands of men, when they could no longer, I don't know, because they could never go west, because they could never journey to the land of the Valar and return. A lot of history, a lot of lore is lost to men other than what the elves wrote down, right? They never saw the two trees of Valinor, only the elves did, right? That's a very interesting concept. And I think that was one Tolkien really took to heart. And I would say that that was probably one of the deepest themes from all of his works. All right.
On to news, baby.
Yeah. First and foremost, The Fall of Gondolin has been released. I hope you guys all know that, and I hope I've advertised it enough. I'm still, I'm looking forward to really diving deeper into it. And I'm happy that we got that third tale from Tolkien's estate, because the three big tales of the Silmarillion that Tolkien wanted to tell was Beren and Luthien, the Children of Húrin, and the Fall of Gondolin / the sail, the voyage of Eärendil or Aurendil. So I'm happy we finally have that. Moving on next, did you want to jump into that one?
Okay, so God, I really hope I pronounce this right. Dominic Monaghan.
Monaghan? Yeah, close enough.
He plays Merry.
Yeah, plays Meriadoc Brandybuck.
He plays Meriadoc Brandybuck in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. He has been cast in Star Wars Episode 9. Now, what does this mean? Not a whole lot. We have no information about this. For all we know, he could be a minor character who appears in one scene, or he could be like a reoccurring character. This new Star Wars trilogy has been pretty big on introducing people and then having them stick around for a long time.
Yeah.
So that's a possibility. I don't think it's very likely, because otherwise we would have heard about this earlier. I just think it's a cool. It's cool. It's going to be awesome to see Dominic in his continue his acting career. And it's also awesome to see some of our old friends from the Lord of the Rings. They're back at it. They're still acting. Whatever he is in this movie, it's not going to trump him in Lord of the Rings, can guarantee that. But
like you said, it's like old friends. It's like it's good seeing your old friends jump back into it. And it's been, oh my gosh, how many years since 2003? That was Return of the King, right? So
yep,
15 years since we saw him in Return of the King. It's been a while. And obviously he's been in other things, but
was it that year? Because I know Fellowship was 2001.
2001. I think there was one every year. 2002, 2003. I'm excited to see him again. I know he's been acting since, but I haven't really seen him in much. And that he's crossing over into my second favorite franchise, Star Wars. That's awesome. So, and speaking of the old actors, Orlando Bloom has been apparently having many reunions with old castmates from the Lord of the Rings. In an article that I'll link in the description, shows him and Ian McKellen and someone else. Let me pull it up here.
He's just some guy.
Oh,
he's one of their friends.
Oh no! That's oh my gosh, which dwarf did he play? He played a dwarf in The Hobbit.
Really?
Yeah. Oh my god.
Oh, I know who you're on about, but I don't. Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah.
It's funny because
So many dwarves. Let's see. He's got to be in here somewhere. So, yeah. So I guess that's another reunion from The Hobbit. Ori. He played Ori the dwarf.
Yeah.
And then there's
he looks a lot different without a beard or
yeah, he does.
glasses.
Yeah. And then Orlando Bloom also ran into Liv Tyler, who is Arwen in The Lord of the Rings. So that's cool. Yeah, again, it's like that's when you know you did it right as a director, I feel like, and as a team, when everyone
still
actually
friends.
Yeah, they're still friends. They love each other. I still feel like they'd fly to the other side of the world if a different castmate or crewmate needed them. So that's really, again, Middle Earth bringing people together. So yeah. Oh yeah, so this came out this month. I think George R. R. Martin has talked about this before, but recently he's talked about how Gandalf has inspired him from a child into his more current writings. This is interesting because he thought, you can't kill Gandalf, right?
I love the title of this article. I'm just gonna read it. George R. R. Martin says Gandalf's death inspired his own thirst for blood. All right, back to you, Yoist. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. No, you're good. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, no, I mean that's pretty much it. He he was like, "Oh, you can't kill Gandalf," and then he was like, "Well, wait a minute, I'm gonna just start doing that to my own." Well, and then he like grew up and started writing his own novels, and then took that idea, that rage that must have boiled within him, or that sadness when Gandalf died, and applied it to his own characters. Rest in peace. A few of our friends, Robb Stark, Ned Stark, most of the Starks. Yeah, pretty much because Gandalf died. So
yeah, it all started there.
Yeah, pretty much. So just real quick, I wanted to give a shout out to the Lord of the Rings living card game. It was released on Steam in the last month, so go ahead and check it out. Again, I'll leave links to pretty much everything that we're talking about here in the description. And yeah, feel free to check it out. Just I always like when new Lord of the Rings games or movies or whatever comes out, because it shows that there's still a lot of invested interest within the franchise. That's awesome. So speaking of that, do you want to bring us into the next segment, Ryan?
All right. So if you've been following the podcast, we talk about Lord of the Rings online frequently. If you've been just watching videos on the Men of the West YouTube channel, it's definitely been mentioned. So Standing Stone Games is the developer, or the current developer of that game. It used to be Turbine before a whole bunch of corporate change and all that. But Athlon Games is the publisher of Warframe. It's a popular game. A lot of people have played it.
I really like Warframe. So
it's one of the. It's an older. It's an older one, I would argue. Like, by older, I'm not too old, but it's not really on the scene today as much as it used to be.
Yeah,
but they have announced that they are developing a new MMO set in Middle Earth. Now, what does this mean? That means that if you're a fan of Lord of the Rings Online, you could be having two different reactions. You could be incredibly excited or incredibly terrified because the market, which to this day went pretty much unchallenged for Lord of the Rings Online and Standing Stone, is now it just got a big competitor.
Oh yeah.
However, I was actually on the Lord of the Rings Online subreddit, and I saw a post about user Nemeris 5 days ago from when we're recording this right now. The TLDR is that he sent an email to one of the Athlon employees. I don't know if it's a developer or whatever, talking about how they're excited to see development within Middle Earth from Athlon Studios. However, they do love Lotro, and they would love it so that Lotro does not go out of business simply because there's a new competitor in the field. And that that person that he emailed actually sent him back a message saying, "Thank you very much. We love Lotro and we share the appreciation," and how much that he kind of dived into a little bit about how much he loved Lord of the Rings Online's attention to detail from lore and geography and all that and the immersive experience. And that's actually what they're looking for from their MMO. And so that they hope to coexist and share an audience.
That would be so cool. And from what I can tell, they're also not doing a game that's around the time of the.
We have exactly zero details about what this is, other than it's in Middle Earth.
That's fair. At least I've heard speculation that it takes place before Lord of the Rings. That's really all I've heard.
I think this is a huge opportunity for an influx, like we saw with the release of The Hobbit, an influx of interest into the idea of Lord of the Rings, and this will be jumping right onto the Amazon show's back.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. And and I'd love it to be, I'm always an advocate for Arnor, more dwarves. And so that would be cool. Maybe it happens around the time. Just, this is complete speculation on my part. I have no idea. At least this is kind of what I'm hoping. If it does take place before The Lord of the Rings and before The Hobbit, take place maybe during the downfall of Arnor, their war against the Witch King in Angmar, the fall of Moria for the dwarves, right? I mean, these all didn't happen at the same time, but I feel like they all happened in a few hundred years. Maybe the Great Plague that Gondor and Arnor faced, and the moving of the hobbits, right? Like, there are a lot of events that took place mid Third Age.
Mostly unlike, we haven't seen a lot from there, so you could go pretty wild from that perspective.
Yeah, and honestly, I hope the developers kind of take some of the mechanics from Warframe. Now, Warframe, like, have you ever played it, Ryan?
No.
It's a very agile, like, fighting game, right? You're an alien that's like jumping on walls and stuff and taking down other aliens. Now, obviously, I hope it's not that much agile of movement. It just wouldn't work in Middle Earth. But I hope they take the fight, like the combat style and the graphics and stuff, and implement that into Middle Earth, because I'd love a Skyrim-esque combat system in a Middle Earth game. I mean, Skyrim's outdated, but
Skyrim's combat system is not amazing, but I understand where you're coming from, and I share that.
Yeah, so just something maybe a little bit more fast-paced, a little bit more immersive in terms of combat. That'd be awesome. So, and if not, if they go the conventional MMO style, that's great too. Again, I love Lotro, so it's awesome.
Speaking of Lotro.
Yeah, speaking of Lotro. So I'm going to link in the description a video from another good Lord of the Rings YouTuber, a good person. He I haven't met him face to face. I've talked to him, I think, on his live streams a few times, but he's a good guy. Andang is his name, and he talks more about this Lotro class from the developer who announced it last week, I think.
So the news is that a new Lotro class is probably being developed right now.
Yeah, and he'll go and discuss that more. But yeah, ultimately, I love this idea, but here's the thing. It's like, they could do a new class, and I do hope that they do a Ranger class. I've been advocating that one for years, but I think they need to improve their other classes first.
I agree wholeheartedly, especially with the state of the game right now, where I play a Guardian, and a Guardian is super vital and super fun to play in a raid-based setting. It's super not fun to play in the PvE setting.
Yeah, exactly. I play Yoiston, who's my captain, and he's my completionist character. Ultimately, I've run him through so many quests. I think I looked the other day. It was like, oh man, five somewhere between 5,000 to 10,000 quests is what I've run Yoiston through. And I love the character, but yeah, I can hardly kill anything landscape-wise, right? PvE, you can hardly take anything down with the captain or the Guardian. I think they did just improve the Guardian's red trait
damage
path.
tree.
Yeah, but they might need more work around that character, like in the tank trait paths. But ultimately, yeah, if they can kind of come back, revise, re-edit their older characters to make the damage more effective, and just kind of more fun. I feel like post Helm's Deep, these characters, you would not hear us complaining about fighting.
Oh my gosh, Helm's Deep was so much fun because it was like it was this perfect balance of there wasn't like too many enemies and they weren't too hard to kill, so it just felt like you were doing something.
Like even in Helm's Deep, they don't need to go back that far, because I remember taking on about 8 orcs at once with my captain. I'm like, okay, I'm a little bit overpowered right now. It's fun, but you know, I'd like a little bit of a challenge. It's like enabling God mode or something. You know, they don't have to go all the way back there, but like with Mordor, I can hardly kill 2 orcs at once. Hardly. And if I'm not paying attention, they'll likely just take me out.
And that's the thing, is that if you've been playing Lord of the Rings Online for a long time and you've been grinding and you've got all those specs, Mordor's a breeze. Yeah. But for the rest of us, not really into the grind, more into the fun and the lore.
And the story.
It's not very fun right now.
I think they got a little bit better when they actually moved out of Mordor in the last update in Erebor and the Northlands. It got a little better, but
get out Mordor.
That's fair. Yeah, you're still stuck in Mordor. Yeah, it got a little better because you didn't have to deal with these debuffs and stuff. But yeah, it's just honestly the landscape is crushing the classes right now. And if they add in another class that's like unoptimized or much better than all the other classes, then what's the point of playing all the other classes? You just play the Ranger or whoever it would be. I hope it's the Ranger. And we haven't even mentioned this yet, but it could just be a monster play class. So.
And yeah, that was the other thing that the YouTuber that you're talking about, I watched his video already on it. And he was talking about, he also advocates for the Ranger class, and then he also advocates for a monster play class. If you don't know what monster play is, if you haven't played Lotro at all, this entire discussion is just doesn't pertain to you at all.
Skip to the next news piece.
But if you have played Lotro and you're not familiar with monster play, or you've never tried it before, I don't blame you, because it's been pretty much the exact same forever.
11 years. Yeah, the game's been out 11 years and it hasn't changed much.
Yeah, the only thing I would say, like, it centers around the Endmoors, where the Endmoors is where you can go and you can play PvP as your level. Well, wherever your max, it moves up with however high a level you are. So what's the current max? I don't even remember.
115.
115. So you can go and you can take your 115 free people or your like main character, and you can go and you can fight monster players, which you unlock after level 10. You go play as like orcs, wargs, spiders, all the fun stuffs. The problem is that Ed Morris has always felt like, as an entry level player, it feels like no matter which side you're on, the other one's overpowered, and that is because the people that farm like both sides. You have people on both sides. Last time I played Ed Morris, I got killed by this like immensely high ranked warg. Like pretty much every time I spawned, I'd walk and I'd like be like, all right, well, he killed me on that side of the map, so I'll just go do a quest on the other side of the map. And there he was anyway. And then when I played Monster Player, I specifically remember Wardens just being unkillable.
Oh, yeah. Yep, that's pretty huge. Yeah, I hope they kind of come back to this old stuff. If they do implement a new class on either the Free Peoples or the Monster Play, I just hope they re-optimize the other characters in the process. It desperately needs it, especially if we're still getting new content. And I love the new content, but it's just like, I can hardly do it. I'm actually trying to get other characters up at this moment to kind of do that content instead of my main, instead of Yoist and my captain, because
he's just not good enough, dog.
Yeah, and like I feel like there's not much I can do to get him to get a lot better. Now I'll still probably just do the main quest with Yoiston, but besides that, I might just do the landscape side quest content with like a hunter or a champion or something. So, well, all right. Well, we'll move on to the final piece of news here. I mentioned this in. Sad. Yeah, it is. I mentioned this in was it last video? No. It was like 2 or 3 videos ago. The 2nd of September was Tolkien's 45th anniversary of his departure from our world. And yeah, I mean, he lived a great life, right? And it's important that we remember him. Again, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I wouldn't be who I am. Royan, you wouldn't be who you are without Tolkien. But yeah, it's been 45 years. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we wouldn't be doing this YouTube channel. So it's been 45 years since he passed away. And I hope you rest in peace, Professor. That's what it comes down to. You know, he was a great man, and he wrote incredible material. So just wanted to bring that up as we kind of close out our news segment. Yeah, there was a lot of news for September. I think that was a 20-minute segment that we just ran.
There's also a lot of Lord of the Rings in September. When we went through that.
True.
So many things happened on the 22nd of September.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, what we're talking about is earlier on in this podcast, we went ahead and we like to go through the monthly events, what happened within the Legendarium in this month, right? This month was September. Next month, we'll talk about October. And yeah, that's all over on our Patreon account. So if you guys liked what you've seen here on this news segment, please head on over to Patreon. And if you're already on Patreon watching this, yeah, it's just $1 to get access to all of our podcasts and the full length version of this podcast. So if you're already on Patreon watching this, thank you very much. Yeah, if you guys have any questions on the YouTube channel or on just Patreon, please let me know.
Comments, baby.
Oh yeah. Let us know. We'll try to address it on the next.
Do we have any questions for this podcast?
I didn't receive any questions for this next podcast, other than to talk about the news, like the MMO and all of that. So, but yeah, ultimately, guys, if you have any questions that you'd like Royan and I to answer on the Westernesse podcast on Patreon, leave them in the comments below, and we'll get to them next month. Thank you guys for joining us this time around. Thank you, Royan, as always.
Hey, I'm just happy to be here. Thanks for having me. If you're one of the regular YouTube viewers and you're just watching the news segment, if you want to know more about like who I am, what I do, go to the Patreon. $1 will get you that first. You can watch the first one. I talk about it a little bit more on that first podcast, but yeah.
Oh yeah, where your name and all that kind of stuff comes from. So yeah, guys, thank you all so much for joining us on this adventure. Until the next one, my friends.